Is everyone already here?
We're missing a couple, but it's time to start, so they'll just have to come in when they get here.
Okay. I can wait for another 3 minutes.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Sound great.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start my second part of sharing. This is what I'm going to start from. The 4 focus points of learning that American Buddhism needs to grasp. I mean by grasp is, the purpose of Buddhist practice. One, we need to complete training, technical skills for your own benefit. The second one is a build up of a capability to benefit to others. You also need skill. That means education broadly in the well-known of Buddhist teaching and their social activity, how to perform it properly and make things work well, supporting. And the third one is concern about the lofty spirit and mentality, means your own higher perspective of transforming transcendent minds that need to always be concerned. Otherwise, you won't going to have easy when the hard time coming to your life. You need to make a very high, decision to overcome problem. It need a lot of attention to this. Pay close attention to the supreme spirituality. This is what I'm say, that concern about lofty spirit and mentality. So one thing is helpful in grabbing the opportunity in life. Life is so challenging. So from time to time, we need to drop off this job and get another new job. You need to travel here and there in order to fulfill the supporting that you can grab to support your life of living. So that is something that the purpose of the Buddhist practice, more practical to say, is very concerning. If you're not conscientiously grab or seize the opportunity in living, sometimes you lose it, you miss it, then you're not going to work very well. Life success need to always open your eyes. So that is why I want to say here, religious characters of Buddhism. This is first point. The second point is humanity's cultivation of Buddhism. You know that Buddhism, you can say this is a religion, you can say this is a culture, but you can say this is what we call that kind of practice, or maybe you can say it is a life science. No matter what you say, but you need to get this civilization identity. What is the difference if we're sharing between other religion, other perspectives of philosophy? What is the difference? So this point, you need to grab it very well, is stand on the human, because the Buddha himself is a mankind. From this perspective, we need to see it very clear. Other religion, especially from the West religion, we may say it differently, but in Buddhism, we say it that way. The third one is social education guidance of Buddhism. What is the direction we need to point to? This need to be a little bit profound knowing, especially training teacher. So we are in the society. So social education is very important. If social education not come to more higher perspective and value, they may drop it into very basic need. That means fulfill the comfortable of sensuality, have this and that support in materialism and support with family. That is what they value. But in Buddhism, our education need to point to the direction more profound meaning. This is what I'm going to express a little bit. And then the last one is the purpose of Buddhist practice. Yeah, this is the point that just now I already mentioned a little bit. And then we can go further. I'm going to help to learn a little bit further in my idea when I do some research. The first one, religious characteristics of Buddhism. One word need to go first is equality. So once we learn the characteristic in Buddhism, it means that they have two characters. One is renunciation, behavior. The second one is how to engage and concern the society. These two parts of his character. So what I want to say is like this: compassion and wisdom is like two winds, can make you fly. If you need to come into the society without compassion and wisdom, we don't bring concern and practically to the society. So you need two winds. And then if we talk about renunciation, secluded, and overcome problem when it's very difficult, you know how to let go, you know how to detach yourself, make your mind more liberty. That you need concentration and wisdom. So mindful or concentration training, then you can observe things without something viewpoint in your mind. So concentration, we call that bare observation. Concentration with wisdom means pay attention. Then it's like your 2 feet, your 2 foot need to stand, both foot stand on the ground before you can do it very well in renunciation. So this is the first thing I want to say is practice. So they have two kind of thing. One is renunciation character. One is involved concern into social engagement. The second one is learned, how to start to, from learning, studying, come to, you get the message, means past tense, learned. So one is learn the Dhamma. Yeah, Dhamma is overcome sectarian. Dhamma is overcome country. So don't say which country, which color, which form and dress you want to put your mind there. No. In the education system, Dhamma can purify your views. So always open your eye to all the tradition, especially any resources we can pull into learning. So from there, we purify our view until all the views we don't care. We just care what is the rising, what is the contact point right here and now. Practically, we know what is going on and easy for you to determine the highest value the possible, and then the more balancing yourself, not in extreme, is possible for you. That is the second part, what I call that discipline to overcome the three poison root. So discipline is the one who want to go to school for learning. So learning process always said that, oh, you need to discipline. If not disciplined, your mind up and down, how can you pick up easy? How can you become very good in observation? So discipline yourself always, discipline your body action and your verbal. See, learning by pick up something before you express yourself. So as you can break up more highest value, you can see then the dust in your eyes, you can purify it. It is easy for you to show balance to the world. That is called learned. After learned means you experience very deep about the life experience in Buddhism, so that you can express and show yourself in a very learned scholar and practitioner. The third one, what I call that vow. After you know and after you practice, if the life still carry on, what can you do? You just help others. So ambitious and very brief to responsible, to put something into your shoulder, you can hold more weight, you can spend more energy for what? For the Dhamma, for the carry on propagating of Dhamma in this society. That's what the learning program will make it possible and make it work for next generation. So we see things far a little bit, not in what our own need, but in the whole. Yeah, Buddhism is not a part of it. It's about all of it. So the thing that best in what just now I said, we can see that if we say that the first thing, equality between human and sentient beings, the equality. So in Buddhism teaching, equality is a very profound meaning, based on all factors of parami and equal. So treat others as equal. This is the first point. Equal treatment means everything come to you, you can share things, material, and then resources, books, everything. You not hide anything. You just put it on the table. Can share everything to the other. This is called equal treatment. The third one is equality and mutual benefit. Means no matter who and who, we are the sister and brother in this practice of Dhamma, and then we stay in this world too. As a human being, we are civilized. So the only thing we can do is you help others, you help yourself. So equality and mutual benefit is very important. Okay. So equal rights of men and women and non-ethnicity and education for all without discrimination. That's the one that I mentioned just now. And the last one is consultations on the basis of equality. No divine power but self-restraint liberation. This is something that in Buddhism that we mention about the characteristic. We come to the second part. Humanistic cultivation of Buddhism. Buddhism, I said, come to the world right now, become a world religion. If from the religion perspective, is a civilization, very conservative civilization from the Buddha times, 1500 BC until right now. It have a very long history. From this long history, from their own teaching, other than the Buddha, they still carry on a lot of process and reform. So reform is because of the need to be get used to fit into society and to liked by people. People happy with you, and then they can accept you. So reform is always take place. When I learn in the school, and Mahayana Buddhism is the one Buddhism that I start my education. So I know Chinese very well, but not very well in English. But I try to say in English is because in this country, I need to get used to it. So reform is a character. Some new idea about doing things, about say something. I'm very excited and happy to learn, happy to read it. Like just now, I have a little bit talking about, when I see the secular Buddhism talk about that one day mindful, in the metta hour, insight hour, like that. I feel very happy because they use a new idea to express Buddhism is right here, right now, right this time. You need to hold by mindfulness. You need to be very pure, aware something. Not let yourself have any, point or any mark to block your eyesight to see the reality. That is something that I call create innovative ideas. So let people can use their own culture, easy to accept the idea in the Dhamma. The third one I want to share with you. No, the second one I want to share with you is a Sangha establishment is supported by teamwork spirit and independent personality. First one is independent personality. That is a very important idea in Buddhism. Independent personality is a very fit into our democratic society. Talk about freedom, talk about everyone need to individually doing something very well and success. So based on that, just differently is the ego self or privacy need to more open up and purify it in order you get something more close to the Buddha himself, mind-free attachments, detachment, turn to detachment, so that kind of independent personality involved into this teamwork. If you so and so always have this and that, it's not going to go very well. I think one case will bring you very easy to see. If you are an important leader of a community or in a part of any kind of system or in a merchant, or even though in a political viewpoint, you need to bring teamwork together. That is the meaning of Sangha spirit. So teamwork can fulfill things very well. You see, enterprise here is going very well, take away all the small business. You can see it like Walmart, and other big company. They grow is because of the teamwork. If you see the Google, if you see that Amazon, then you see teamwork is more spirit than individual, small group. So that is what I want to say. The Buddha is the very reformer. He knows the power of Sangha. The third one, responsibilities of cultural workers to purify the society. Until right now, I think that Buddhism propagating the Dhamma in this country, if one day in the future, I don't know how long ago, but one day, if Buddhism can accept by this society, we may doing something like the Christianity or like Catholic or like the Jewish hospital or anything they can do. Not only the culture teaching, but they have bring more workmen to the work site. They can create a lot of job for them, and then they can build up a lot of like hospital, school for people to get benefit to it. But Buddhism right now only can propagating the Dhamma and come to practice. Not much practically we can fulfill this social welfare. So social welfare is something I'm very shy to say. I feel a little bit that this talk is only bring some idea, not bring things, a solid step to the ground. So in the coming future, Buddhism need to do more than this. Practice, education, come to social welfare. These three circles need to combine together in order Buddhism have the meaning into society. Okay, last one. Last one is something that is my opinion. Just a little bit, you can read it and understand. I don't want to explain it too far. And we go to the third. Here is something that social education guidance of Buddhism. Where to start the teaching? So I call it that the teachings may start as a common. The teaching sequence of the 7 methods. One book will have all this record. That is called the Samyutta Nikaya. Buddhism already spread very far from his motherland to the world. So a lot of sutra, commentary, and the master's teachings, a lot of information, a lot of books that already into the society, so-called them Buddhist writing, Buddhist information. The main teaching is in this, I say, Samyutta Nikaya. Why Samyutta Nikaya is very important? Because of, in my own experience of learning about Buddhist history, they have 4 Nikaya in the Chinese, we call them 4 Agama. They have 5 Nikaya in the Pali term. So they put it into different sequence, like some saying, like Thailand saying, is the Teta Nikaya go first, Majjhima, and then Sanyutta, Anguttara, like that. They have different sequence. But the Chinese side, I think, in my own opinion, it is more accurate into the resources historical processing. Because Sanyutta Nikaya, if you read it there, they have not much explanation. They have just record what the very simplified message from the Buddha. They talk about 5 skandha, 6 sense space. They coming to 18 elements. It come to independent co-arising. It come to the 4 noble truths, like that. The process just very connected to the message when the Buddha time. He promoted his teaching to the society. So this 7 method is right over there. I hope will open your eye when you have time back to this information all the time to check. From you, if you check it, then explaining saying come to Majjhima Nikaya, more longer explaining and make example, it come to Teta Nikaya in difference of need. This is called the 7 methods. The second is a core teaching. Yeah, I think everyone will know the core teachings for Dhamma seals. I'm not going to give more explanation. And then the third one is moral education and mental development. We are not only come to take the critique and knowledge from what you learn, but mental development is the second part. Day by day, year after year, I think we will get aging and we will be one day not too active anymore can take place in the society. So from this very urgent and very serious process of the life, our own, morality, our own mental purification or the concentration would need to develop, need to cultivate our mind, reflection to all this behavior. See, any part of that have difficulty for myself, like that. Any food, yeah, any other sensuality, difficulty for the life itself. This is very important because our education between us and the knowledge of the society have very different perspective. We need to grab it properly and know what is going on in order not get rid of the trap. New life of the awakened ones and develop in great power, great loving kindness and compassion. Yeah, this is, I hope everyone can enlighten a little bit in order to purify, in the society, we can see a lot of things. We just competition. We just want to rob here, come to my side, push there, come to your side. A lot of conflict going on in the society. If we involve social movement, what can we do? Yeah. Other than this, I don't know what to do. The power of great loving kindness and compassion, And then we need to learn the wisdom in order we can see things properly, what we need to handle it in which way, what kind of skillful we need to put it into practice. This is what I say. So Buddhism is some kind of civilization of human. So from the human perspective, we are all equal in the society. So what we are good, the society will turn into good. If we are poor, the society go to poor. This is very important. So even though Buddhism come to this country, when we want to build up the system, that is what I am trying to do, is bring all the teaching together. When I see in the Sri Lanka university, Buddhist university, they have the same idea. What I saw, they put all the teaching in equally important. So this is a message that we can bring together. Even though the dress is different, the tradition of living life is a little bit different, but it doesn't matter. The Dhamma need to be higher than all other perspectives. So then we can bring the teaching come together, because the monk have one way of active in the society is become a traveler. He don't have any particular home. His home is according to the condition. Who invited, I will serve there. Yeah, that is the life. So we learn a lot of traveling experience to become the activate. So from this is a Sangha, no matter what country we are come from, and even though the local community too, we are not only staying here, we are according to who asks for, invited for, we will travel according from there, because the Dhamma is belong to everyone. Yeah, this is what I want to say, social education guidance of Buddhism. And then part 3. Yeah, this is the last one. If anything want to share with you. Not much I can say, but this is very important part is the if we see about the future of American Buddhism, we don't know what is the American Buddhism right now. We just see the phenomenon, this and that from different locations, from different projects. They are put a lot of energy and do a lot of hardship work there to fulfill their dream. So American Buddhism, what it look like depend on their leader, depend on the organization, accept by the followers, accept by local. So what I want to mention is, the first thing is high levels of talents. This is very important. The second one is the high standards of organization. So I put these two into my dream, if in the future of American Buddhism, I involved to, I put my energy to what is the dream I'm dream for. I dream for, something that tradition, Sangha, talents, chain. I use my chainsaw to mention something. This is a chain that we need, not only one thief need to form a chain in order to work very well. So see HAIN, talent chain is what I want to mention. In the tradition, here you can see highlands of talents in the tradition. Dhamma teachers, Vinaya teachers, Abhidharma teachers, meditation teachers, Buddhist chanting teachers. I lead 5 of them, maybe more than that, but this is the main professional skill, professional training. They're separated into different, what we call that, different fields. Some is good for this, some is good for that. Maybe one master can, maybe they are good for 2 or 3 factor of these 5 factors. It depends on their talents. I want to say to myself, you know, this is my my heart. I hope I can fulfill these 5 factors in the life of my dream. But until right now, I only, you know, professional in one is meditation technique. This is mostly, not much I already share with everyone. The Dhamma teaching is the one that I can you know, not too good, but I have confidence to share. I can learn, you know, pick up something and share with you. If they're not too good, I can correct myself. That is not important. But meditation, you cannot say, I teach you, if make mistake, I correct a little bit for you. You cannot do that. Meditation need to tell something that you already master. You need to very well skillfully into your own training before you share for others. This is a lab. This is not in the lecture room. Yeah. So meditation is the very profound meaning in my life. So I go first. And then secondly is Dhamma. Dhamma can make myself, you know what is the skillful mean putting into words. And then the third one is Vinaya. Vinaya always is the foundation. So even though a lay practitioner want to follow what they say in this society, what we see is called secular Buddhism, is a lay practice teacher. They are showing in this country and very well accepted in this country. But slowly they need to build up the discipline. The discipline have very common to all teachers and different kind of teacher in different level of training. You can teach different information, but the discipline of daily life, they have only one way to go, is check the Vinaya, check the what we call the Sila Vinaya teaching. That is the order bring from the original teacher as what you name as a Dhamma teacher, as a teacher who teach Buddhism, teach the followers. You need to follow the Vinaya. So this what we need to know about. And then the chanting right now, we already built up something like the 10,000 Buddha cities, monastery, Hengshi Bhikkhu or Hengshi master. He already take something, you know, the Buddhist teaching, put it into the country song. It means use the cowboy culture to show Buddhist singing, use this kind of skill, help people to learn and sing it very easy in the Buddhist story. That is a new perspective, what I want to mention a little bit. And okay, I need to pass it very fast because of the times already almost there. This is what we can share from Taiwan, because a lot of country, no such a country, I see their education and their social engage like Taiwan. From the 50s, when Communist Party take over mainland China, so Buddhism from that region already declined, almost come to corruption because of the mankind talents all gone. If left some that escape mainland and come to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Manila, Philippines, and come to Malaysia, Singapore, or they can find a way to go, escape. They don't trust communism, so come to the free world. So from the 60s, very poor situation in Taiwan when Buddhism come to the island. And from the 60s come to 70s, they have a lot of difficulty and a lot of criticized by Christian local community. So Buddhism learn a lot from them and discover, create a lot of new education way in order to bring the teaching to the society. So from the 1890s until right now, 21st century, what I found, their education system already becomes the whole population of Taiwan people. They say right now have almost half of the population, they name themselves or they have more tendency connected to the Dhamma. This is what I see in Taiwan. I want to say these 4 monasteries or the organization is very well established. So established is a success for the Taiwan Buddhism. One is Dhammadram's monastery. If you go to see Dhammadram's University and their whole system is very modernized Buddhism take place, the education, they open to the world for all the overseas children come to educate in the more higher level, higher qualities of education. That is the first one I want to share. The second one is Fo Guang San, is social engagement. How to bring these member, followers, or students growing as the general purpose. So how to involve into the social engagement. And this social exercise bring Buddhism can connect it to one who is non-Buddhist, who have the potential, bring them to our side. That is how Fo Guang San doing the management of social movement is quite profound in their experience. We need to check a little bit from there. And then Tzu Chi Foundation is the one that we have it here too. Tzu Chi Foundation, they are the charity foundation doing a lot of urgent needs and other, what we call it, the social welfare fund. doing good job to help the poverty, to help urgent and exhausted by a lot of urgent problem that facing danger and hurt our society. Another one is called Taichung Zen Temple. We found it two. One I met them. One is in the Houston, Texas. They have one branch there, and then another branch is in Seattle, and one is in San Francisco. I know 3 of them. They have more than that. This Taichung Zen Temple is because of the 3 of them just now I mentioned, Dhammachram, Fo Guangshan, and Tzu Chi. They go to different education, mass movement, and the Buddhist welfare activity. But when Taiwan Buddhism criticized by this opinion, say, oh, you're going to have a lot of activity and education, but you are not practice. You don't know how to experience about jhana. You don't know much skillful mean and systematically teaching Zen Buddhism. Then this will be another fashion come out from the society. The requirement, this condition showing that Zhong Tai is the master of the founder. I forgot the name of founder. So then this Zhong Tai will become the Zen, especially what we call the Chinese collectors of the Zen training. It become very popular, and then they build a lot of different locations, branches open up to the training. If Buddhism in this country, lots of potential and opportunity we can open up ourselves. We just need talents, manpower, and professional training in different perspectives. Here is something that I want to carry on. If we want to view a little bit how we're going to make Buddhism more easy to accept by who come to explore and come to learn. It really have a lot of different perspectives from different locations. That is what I travel when I see. When you go to the West, San Francisco, and you go to Los Angeles, that region, California, it's so Buddhism in there is no problem for local people to get information as a Buddhism survivor there. And when you go to the New York, Boston, like that in the East, it still have a lot of potential and opportunity you meet Buddhism. So their development is very different. If you go to San Francisco, your experience, and you go to New York, you can see it very different. New York is a multicultural city, and Los Angeles, there is a lot of more spiritual. They are building a lot of temple and monastery training center. It's not in the city, but in the countryside. Then you can see a lot of spirit there. They are look for more simplicity of life, not care too much about this and that. They just want to get the life more easy going on. But in New York, it's different because of multicultural there. The city is very, very expensive to have property. So once you go there, you can see different things going on. And right now we are in the Central America, St. Louis area. So if we want to doing something, so native culture views and experience is very important. We need to add in. I make myself, if you see Maba, in the very early times, I still thinking not turn into land yet. So I would do something Asian way, and later on, when I think it's maybe we can create a little bit new. So I turn it into more fit into the culture, not try to build more colorful thing, but more simplicity of life form. And then we using this, what we call that facility to open up the teaching. What we want to show when we open up the teaching is show the standards of organization and the quality of manpower. So here is something. High standards of organization, that is a dream. When we say that after training teacher, so the teacher can help and can serve into our organization, or the facility will be using to help. The facility is the base for them as a platform to perform themselves. When you see this, I'm writing based on all the factors of paramita and equality. Just now I already mentioned about equality and paramita. I want you to do your own homework. In Chinese Buddhism, when we talk about paramita, we have 4 paramita. We have 6 paramita, and we have 10 paramita. And if you open another books that from Burma, the translation talking about Theravada Buddhism talk about paramita, they have 10 paramita. If you put all this together, that is the talent of very high qualities of man who stand on the noble path. They need to grab this. No matter 4 parami, 6 parami, or 10 parami, you need to have this factor in order you can successfully stand on the platform of organization as a Sangha to help succeed in the propagation of Dhamma. So high standards of this organization in the teaching spirit of the Buddha. The Buddha himself in the very early day, he formed the Sangha, he already gave the principle for this organization. This is the 6 harmonies in the Sangha community. I want to bring out again because of organization. If we follow the structure of the business organization or the non-profit organization of this country, I see the by law we set up is not too fit to the spirit of Buddhism. Sometimes they use it a board member as the businessman to do the politics, what we call a larger politics inside, in order the board can run this community, cannot fit into the Sangha organization. It brings me a lot of deep thinking about it, because I see there is not harmony in the community. Someone have power that don't follow discipline, that don't stay into the Sangha, that stay in their own house. And some Sangha, they stay in the community, but they don't have the board, that they are not the board member. So make a lot of difficulty into the organization. So that I will say, the Buddha himself have very spiritually mentioned about the Sangha need to base on these 6 harmonies, because these 6 harmonies will bring you into 10 benefits. But I can't find the 10 benefits from the Vinaya discipline showing that the 10 benefits. But I found a translation by a Bhikkhu who stay in Malaysia. His name is called Kandiparo. And Kung Yen, Venerable, helped me to check out this. She found the Bhikkhu Kandiparo still alive. He is now in Australia, almost 90 years old, as a monastic. So in a very early day when he stayed in Malaysia, I know him a little bit is because of he do a lot of youth Buddhist program in Malaysia, especially in Penang Island in the very early day. So that is what made me a little bit surprising, because he is not there in Malaysia anymore, what I know. Before I came to the United States, but after being checking and doing my mission here, I found he is still alive, and the life that bring him still beneficial to the Buddhist Sangha in Australia as a Vietnamese ordination monastic stay in Australia helping Buddhists. So I see, oh, alive, if you connected in the Dhamma, it always influenced by the Dhamma and do the thing that proper and fit to the life. So as what his translation, I want to share with you a little bit. This translation, almost my time end. Maybe I don't have much time. I just a little bit outline it. 1 to 2 for the welfare of the Sangha and for the comfort of the Sangha. This is called harmonious staying. The second part for the control and unsteady man, for the comforts of well-behaved people. This called for the comfort of the Sangha is for their peace and happiness. For the comfort and well-behaved people, this is the purification. If well-behaved people, the Sangha organization is the platform for them to purifying come to the path and to the fruit. The 5 and 6 is social engaged, helping others. This organization of the 6 harmony will bring you very easy without others side effect when we dealing with the restraints, pollution in present life, and guiding against pollution liable to arise in a future life. And the 7 and the 8 is on the path to the fruit, who connected with the Dhamma. Last 2 is overcome an idea. For the establishment of the true Dhamma and for the benefit of the Vinaya, the discipline itself. When the discipline is here, the Dhamma can be everlasting. When the everlasting of the Vinaya, the Dhamma have the platform. This is called the idea of the Buddha. He established the Dhamma and Vinaya into one, not separate into 2 parts. This is a very important message for the organization. One is the 6 harmonies. The second one is this 10 benefit. I'm going to end my talk. I'm going to end my talk right now and here and give a little bit time for the comments and question answer. And I will do a little bit addition to my PowerPoint. So after finish all I have a lot of notes still writing in Chinese. I want to add it in order I can share it to everyone. I end my talk right here, and I hope you write it and open up to the comments.
Master, we've had many traditions come to the United States, seemingly all at the same time. Other countries have had one tradition, you know, Chan in China. Is that possibly to our disadvantage to have had so many different views of Buddhism come into this country? Maybe Americans are a bit confused.
No. You have not seen like me. Every country have the same situation what we deal in this country. Buddhism is a big family. They are not individual going alone. They were sharing information, invited travel teacher all the time. So if you are qualified teacher, you like people love you, then you have a large opportunity to travel like me. You see, my mission, I don't bring any dollar come to this country, but I can build up everything by the supporter. Mostly, you know that in the early days, supporter is not local people.
Mm-hmm.
You see, why we can do this? Because of this big family. Generation to generation, we connected to each other. Once right now is the school, we just begin start. And later on, I will bring you group, you know, and travel to here, there, visit them and have a lot of dialogue exchange. This is how we train people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, once you go country to country and learn something and experience their living and propagating of Dhamma, then it will bring you a lot of openness. Yeah. So don't worry, it all come to once.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in the, just say a little bit my story. You know, in the old day, when 1980, I'm in the Theravada tradition, stay in Thailand as a monk. Once I found some writing and translation from the Chinese language at the Dhamma book. So I said, oh, I'm going to study a little bit from there. That is my mother tongue. I can easily understand then the Thai language. You know, in that time, still slowly pick up. And then my preceptor said, oh, I know there is Buddhism, but I don't know how to get the connection with them. We don't have connection at all. 1983. So when I say, I want to go there, then my master said, oh, then you need to disrobe and then go there and have the ordination again. Because in that way, at first he don't say anything. I said, I don't want to give up, you know. And then, oh, it's not give up. If you don't go to trust like them, they'll not accept you easy. This is my preceptor told me. See? And then after that, 1995, 96, they already have exchange. You know, the world is more open. And then the travel is more open. And the languages, they overcome. They have, you know, not only Thai people cannot speak Chinese. Chinese people don't know Thai language. They will all pass this difficulty of languages. So they have a larger exchange. And then 1995 on, what I see is you don't need to, you know, disrobe and then go to other tradition. You just need to go to the tradition and tell the monk, oh, I come to your side and learning. Then you strap the uniform in their tradition. They will witness you. You are still the monk. You don't do wrong. So you're not disrobed like that. You see, they have more opportunity to come to the side to learn different things. But right now, as what my mind is, more open, you know, not the stress. What you stress represent anything. This only present a uniform of different tradition, not represent the Dhamma. The Dhamma is overcome the uniform. I think one day you can strut like the cowboy. You wear jeans, you know, you wear the cowboy jeans, you still can represent a Dhamma teacher. I will accept it and happily accept it, because if you teach as the Dhamma accordingly, this is the Dhamma. So that make me more open myself, you know. I think if Buddhism need to be what we call that prosperity in the future, to strong, involved, and accept by people, we need to overcome a lot of things. You see Muslim what they do, you see Christian what they do, in order for their own benefit and benefit to others. Make this world more peace and make this world more equal and more harmony. That is the mission of Buddhism. Yeah, if we can spirit on that, then we can overcome a lot of this custom or tradition. Make sense? Any comments? If no other comments, oh, here, Lee. Lee is here. Lisa is here. Oh, there is a new members. Beth.
Beth is our future teacher.
Oh, good. Can you understand me well, Beth?
Yes, I can understand you very well, and I appreciate
Okay.
your,
I'm still learning my pronunciation because I pronounce a lot of words that when I am in Malaysia, they already have mistake. Right now, I found a good teacher correct me. I go very diligent. I hope one day I can speak more better English that can easily understand by people.
no, you're coming across beautifully. Thank you.
Okay, my time is up. I'm going to drop right here, and then the second more another Picobody as our elders monastics well known in this country, and then a lot of support to us as we try to do something help the teacher program. So right now, I will invite you whenever Picobody give us his knowledge about American Buddhism. I hope he can bring you more idea and more profound viewpoint to this topic. Please, Picobody, please.
Okay. So as I told Kong Yen, is Kong Yen a monastic?
Yes.
I don't see an image. I just see the box. Is it a monk or nun? I don't.
Hong Yan, show yourself.
Yeah, Kong Yen.
Sorry, hi. I'm in the same hall with Master Jiu. I mute myself to avoid the echoes. I'm very sorry about this.
Okay.
Yes, Venerable Bhikkhu, I'm a
Yeah.
bhikkhuni at Mava.
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
welcome, and we are so happy to have you to give us a talk this afternoon.
Okay. So as I told her, I'm American and I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist monk, but I'm not in any way a specialist in studying of American Buddhism. So when I got this topic, I had to do some research on my own and some reflection to speak about it. So I took down some notes, which I'll refer to. And I don't intend to treat the topic in a historical perspective, but still it's useful just to go back a little bit and to look at some of the, maybe call this the historical landmarks in the development of American Buddhism. So according to the sources that I've consulted, probably the first Buddhists in the United States would have been Chinese laborers who came from China to the US to work on the railroad. And of course, they wouldn't have had temples or monasteries with monastics in charge, but they would have brought some of the paraphernalia of the religion, maybe Buddha statues, and maybe set up some altars to conduct their services. And then perhaps around the same time or a little bit later, still in the 19th century, Japanese immigrants came to the US, probably primarily to California, to work as farmers, to work on the farms. And these Japanese Buddhists were primarily of the Jodo Shinshu school. That's the school of Pure Land. It's quite possible that they came not directly from Japan to the US, but perhaps through Hawaii, from Hawaii to California. And the Japanese followers of the Pure Land Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, eventually evolved into a major American Buddhist denomination, which came to call itself the Buddhist Churches of America. And they're currently based, they have their headquarters is in San Francisco. I still remember the address, 1710 Octavia Street, because back in the 1960s, when I became, the late 1960s, when I became interested in Buddhism, they had a very, very good, probably they still do, but in a different location, a very, very good Buddhist book service. And they had a very good, thorough catalog. So I used to order their catalog, and then through their catalog, I used to order the books from them. That address is always stuck in my mind, 1710 Octavia Street, San Francisco. Okay, but until fairly recently, the Jodo Shinshu form of Buddhism, or the Pure Land, the Japanese version of Pure Land Buddhism, has remained very much an internal Japanese mode of belief and practice. So speaking about the time that Buddhist ideas or Buddhism itself became introduced to the larger American community, probably the decisive event that marked the real introduction of Buddhism to the United States would have been the World Parliament of Religions that was held in Chicago in 1893. And amongst the dignitaries, religious dignitaries that were invited to the World Parliament of Religions on the Buddha side, there came a Japanese Zen master named Shaku Soyen. And he brought along with him as his interpreter a Japanese lay student who is fairly fluent in English, and his name was D.T. Suzuki, who actually stayed on in the US after Shaku Soyen returned to Japan. And Suzuki became one of the major influences in the development of American Buddhism. We'll deal with him in a little greater detail later. Another person who came to Chicago for the World Parliament was a Sri Lankan Buddhist leader named Anagarika Dharmapala. And he was a very charismatic person, very eloquent speaker. And after the Parliament, I believe he might have traveled around the United States giving lectures, though he didn't stay on in the US for an extended period of time, because he saw his mission as the revival of Buddhism in India. He had come from Sri Lanka to India and saw how the ancient Buddhist sites had fallen into a states of decrepitude. And so he made his main mission the restoration of these sacred places of Buddhism, particularly the site of the Buddha's enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. And in India, Dharmapala established a whole network of centers, which were called the Mahabodhi Society, which has centers in Bodh Gaya, Calcutta, and other cities in India. Yeah, I think another figure who came along with Shaku Soyen, or maybe a little bit after, he was another Zen Buddhist teacher whose name was Soke-an Suzaki. And he eventually came to New York City. The date that I have here is 1931. He came to New York City and he established what he called the first Zen Institute of America in New York City. And it still continues in New York City, though under a different name. I think now it's called, I believe, the Zen Studies Society. Another pupil or associate of Soyen, of Shaku Soyen, who came to the United States, was named Nyogen Sanzaki. And he based himself in Los Angeles, and he established what he called the floating zendo. He called it the floating zendo because they didn't have a fixed center, fixed base, but he would conduct meditation programs and teachings in different homes, in whichever home he was giving the teaching and the meditation that particular day was the zendo for that day. And Nyogen Senzaki also helped to produce a book which had a very, very, maybe I can't say a major impact, but it played a significant role in the unfolding consciousness of many people who were initially learning about Zen Buddhism. This was a book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which he prepared together with an American named Paul Reps. And what the book contains basically are translations of these little Zen anecdotes, the encounters of master and student, and selections from one of the Zen classics called The Gateless Gate. And so in this way, that I think it was first published in the perhaps in the 1950s, perhaps even earlier, but it became a fairly influential work. In fact, it was one of the first books on Buddhism that I encountered back in the period late 1964, 1965. And we used to, together with my friends, we used to read some of these stories, and then we used to laugh over them together. Okay, coming back to D.C. Suzuki, in the early 20th century, he stayed in Chicago under the auspices of a leading kind of eclectic spiritual thinker called Paul Carus, C-A-R-U-S. Paul Carus produced a book called The Gospel of Buddha, I think it was called, which featured stories from the life of the Buddha and excerpts from the teachings of the Buddha, which was composed somewhat in the style, a little bit in the style of the King James version of the Bible. So it gave the Buddhist text something of a biblical flavor. And Paul Carus had started a publishing outfit called, I think, Open Court Publishing. And he was a kind of patron or sponsor for D.T. Suzuki to stay in Chicago and do some writings on Buddhism and translation of Buddhist texts. And I think it was when he was in Chicago that Suzuki wrote a book called Outlines of Mahayana Buddhism, which I believe is still published today, or at least it's available on the internet. And he also did a translation of a work called The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. It's ascribed to the Indian Buddhist poet called Ashvaghosha, but actually is pretty much regarded by scholars now as being a native work composed in China and then ascribed back to the original Ashvaghosha. At a later time in the 1950s, Suzuki came to New York City, and I believe he taught at the First Zen Institute, but also he reached a wider audience by lecturing at Columbia University. He stayed in New York, I believe, for 6 years, lecturing at Columbia University, lecturing on Buddhism and particularly Zen Buddhism. And through his lectures, Suzuki attracted a wide variety of people awakening their interest in Zen, coming from different groups. One sizable contingent of Suzuki's followers were psychotherapists who saw, because Suzuki was very skillful in sort of adapting and explaining Zen Buddhism in a way that, I have to say, watered down the Buddhist connections or the Buddhist roots of Zen and made it seem like a code for living meaningfully in the present. And so Suzuki had a strong attractive appeal, a strong appeal of attraction to psychologists and psychotherapists. And another contingent of people who were attracted to Suzuki's style of teaching were artists and poets and painters who, because Suzuki also gave a fair amount of emphasis to the artistic side of Zen Buddhism, the Zen style of painting and poetry and the art of tea and the art of swordsmanship, the art of archery. And then a third group who became very attractive to, very much attracted to the teachings of Zen through Suzuki was the group that were known as the Beat Generation. And that included the writers Jack Kerouac, the poet Allen Ginsberg, and then one of the Beat poets named, I believe he's still alive today, Gary Snyder, actually went to Japan and took to Zen very, very seriously and stayed at Japanese Zen monasteries and practiced very, very rigorously. The other Beats who were attracted to Zen pretty much adapted Zen to the Beat way of life rather than adapting themselves to the Zen way of life. But Ginsberg later, probably decades later, did become a more serious student of Buddhism under the Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa. But because of the way Suzuki presented Zen, the Beats saw that Zen didn't require a strict discipline of self-control and self-regulation, but they would draw upon the stories of the Zen masters who would act in rather idiosyncratic, antinomian ways, acting as free spirits. And they thought that was the essence of Zen, to do whatever you want without any constraints, without any feeling of any constriction by the ordinary moral standards of society. And that was their Zen way of life. That was their Beat way of life. And so they interpreted Zen through that particular lens. Okay, but perhaps of this early wave of Zen teachers, the ones who might have laid the foundation for a serious American adoption of Zen Buddhism would have been Soke-an Sasaki in New York City and Yogin Senzaki in Los Angeles, since they had established and taught the actual discipline of Zen meditation, whereas Suzuki very seldom mentioned in his presentation, very seldom mentioned meditation, the discipline of meditation. In fact, in my early days of learning about Buddhism, I also read the works of Suzuki. He had an anthology published, I think it was called simply Zen Buddhism, Selected Writings of D.T. Suzuki. And you see again and again Suzuki presenting the stories of the student comes to the master and asks a question, and the master hits the student with his stick or gives what seems to be a completely unrelated answer, and the student gets Kensho or Satori, the flash of enlightenment, but no mention that the student had been maybe meditating 6 to 8 or 10 hours a day trying to solve that koan or problem. And so we used to think that all you have to do is come up with some completely irrational idea, and that would be enlightenment. Okay, so maybe the first major wave of Buddhism in the United States that spread through the immigrant culture would have been Zen Buddhism, through the influence of these Japanese teachers. Then I think the next wave, if I can use that expression, or the change in flavor of American Buddhism would have come with the arrival of some Tibetan teachers. Particularly, probably the most influential was Chogyam Trungpa, who originally went from India to establish a monastery in Scotland in the 1960s. Then I think he left, well, he left the monastic robes in Britain around the late 1960s, so maybe early 1970s. Then he came to the United States in 1971 and established a center in Vermont, and then moved from Vermont, though he kept the center in Vermont, but he established a larger base of operations in Boulder, Colorado. And he was very well educated, not only in the traditional Tibetan Buddhist learning, but also in Western ways of thought. He had studied at Oxford University. And so, his English was very good and his way of thinking very sharp. And so he had a very charismatic appeal to American students and attracted a large number of followers. And under his influence, many centers affiliated with his base in Boulder were established. And they were originally called Dharma Dhatus. And I think the base in Boulder was called Vajra Dhatu. But over time, and after a number of scandals involving Chogyam Trungpa and his disciples, there have been significant changes in that particular system of institutions, and now they're called Shambhala centers. So Chogyam Trungpa, I think, was the first Tibetan teacher who exercised a major influence amongst the larger population. But as I'm speaking, it occurred to me that there was an earlier Lama who taught Tibetan Buddhism, though he was not Tibetan himself, but he was Kalmuk Mongolian. And his name was Geshe Wangyal. And the Kalmuk country is in what's now Russia, at that time part of the Soviet Union, along the Black Sea. It's a region in the Black Sea, which was inhabited by people of the Mongolian community called Kalmuk Mongolians. And Geshe Wangyal had been sent by his teacher. His teacher's monastery was actually in St. Petersburg. This was before the Russian Revolution. And his teacher, a Kalmuk Lama, sent Geshe Wangyal to Tibet to study. And then Geshe Wangyal, after his studies in Tibet, had traveled around China, and somehow, I don't remember how, but he came to the United States, and settled in New Jersey, because there was a fairly large community of Kalmuk Mongolian immigrants who had settled in New Jersey, Freehold, New Jersey. And so he established his first monastery there, and then he established a retreat center in rural New Jersey, Washington, New Jersey. And a number of Americans came to study with Geshe Wangyal. And amongst those were two who played a major influence in the dissemination of Tibetan Buddhism in the United States. One of them is named Jeffrey Hopkins, who later became a translator for the Dalai Lama. And Jeffrey Hopkins established a program or a faculty of Buddha studies at the University of Virginia, and has trained many of the current leading scholars of Tibetan Buddhism in the United States. And Jeffrey Hopkins himself was quite a prolific author and translator of many important Tibetan texts into English. And the other important student of Geshe Wangyal is Robert Thurman, who for many years was professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia University. and is also been quite a prolific author and translator of Buddhist texts from Tibetan into English. Okay, so Tibetan teachers started to come maybe in the early 1970s. Maybe I should mention also about that time, so that this is where my own connections with Buddhism were established in this period, late 1960s, early 1970s. So how did I get involved with Buddhism at that time? I became interested in Buddhism about the middle 1960s, initially through the writings of D.T. Suzuki. And I should mention also in connection with Suzuki, Suzuki had an Anglo-American interpreter named Alan Watts, who wrote quite a number of influential books on Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism, sort of explaining the philosophy of Zen through the lens, we say, of contemporary systems theory, and connecting the thought of Zen Buddhism, the philosophy of Zen and Taoism and other Eastern modes of thought, connecting it with modern scientific ideas like quantum theory, relativity theory, though not in a rigorous way, since he was not a scientist by training, but a sort of popularizer of Buddhist ideas. Okay, so my initial contact with Buddhism was through reading some of the writings of Suzuki and Alan Watts. Then I went in 1966 to graduate school in Claremont, California. And the second semester that I was there, this was in early 1967, a Buddhist monk from Vietnam came to study at Claremont University. And he came to live in the same residence hall where I was living. And I wanted to learn meditation. And so I went to him for guidance in meditation, and we wound up becoming friends, and he became my first Buddhist teacher. And I was actually ordained under him as a novice, a samanera, within the Vietnamese Mahayana system. Then after he completed his studies, he went back, he returned to Vietnam. He was not Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a famous Vietnamese Buddhist monk. So he had been in Vietnam, he had been a friend of Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay, but my teacher had a friend, another Vietnamese monk, who came to Los Angeles to teach at UCLA, to teach for a year at UCLA. And then when his teaching assignment came to an end, he decided to stay on in Los Angeles, and he established a Buddhist center in Los Angeles called the International Buddhist Meditation Center. And then when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, then I came to stay at that center for 2 years, from 1971 and 1972. And while I was staying there, then I encountered some Buddhist monks from Sri Lanka who were passing through Los Angeles, and I became friendly with them. And one of them suggested that I come to Sri Lanka to stay at a Buddhist monastery. And so that became my connection to Sri Lanka. Yeah, so it's around this time, let's say that I give myself as an example, but it's around this time, late 1960s, early 1970s, that the interest in Buddhism is really accelerating amongst non-immigrant Americans. What is the expression that we should use? They use Native Americans now for people that we used to call the American Indians. Indigenous Americans, again, that's used for the indigenous peoples. I don't want to use Caucasian because we're not all Caucasian. There are also African Americans, Latinos, but let's say the native born Americans. So that interest in Buddhism was just accelerating. In San Francisco, there came another Suzuki, not the D.T. Suzuki, but Shunryo Suzuki. originally invited to San Francisco by the Japanese immigrants who were affiliated with the Soto Zen school. But Shunryo Suzuki found that many Americans living in or around San Francisco were starting to come to join him with his sessions of sitting meditation. And that led to the development of the San Francisco Zen Center, already starting perhaps in the late 1960s. And then they purchased land in Tassajara, California, and developed the Tassajara, the retreat center. And then in Southern California, near Los Angeles, Joshu Sasaki came to settle in that part of California and established a meditation center in Los Angeles, the Cimarron Zen Center. So the interest is starting to accelerate in the United States itself, but also Americans are going abroad to learn Buddhism, or they've been in Asia for some other reason. And then while in Asia, they connect with Buddhism. So amongst those would be some who became connected to the Theravada tradition. So one was a man, he had been in military service in Asia. And then he came to Thailand and became a monk. And his name was, as the ordination name was Sumeda or Sumedo. And he became Achan Sumedo, who later established a major monastery in Great Britain, in England, actually several monasteries in England and elsewhere in Europe. And at that time, also around the same time, there are some Peace Corps workers who, after leaving the Peace Corps, connected with Buddhism in different ways. One of them also came to learn with the Thai master Achan Cha, along with Achan Sumedo. But he didn't last long as a monk. He returned to the United States, and his name is Jack Cornfield, who helped to establish meditation centers first in Massachusetts, Barre, Massachusetts, the Insight Meditation Society. And then he relocated to California, where he established the Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And then another, I think he was a former Peace Corps worker who went to India to learn meditation and studied with a lay teacher named Munindra. And this man, his name was Joseph Goldstein, who also came back to the United States in the middle 1970s and collaborated with Jack Cornfield in establishing the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. And Joseph excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Joseph continues to be a major teacher at the Insight Meditation Center in Barre, Massachusetts, even today. Okay, now I want to, and I can't be utterly comprehensive in treating all of the developments in American Buddhism, but I want to now turn to some of the, what I call some of the significant features in American Buddhism, sort of the features which may differentiate it from Asian Buddhism. And one very significant feature, which is almost in a way revolutionary or transformative, is that in America or the United States, the three different major Buddhist traditions are coming together in close proximity in the same country at the same time. So the three major traditions in Asia, they grew and developed in very different regions of Asia. So we have the Theravada tradition, which in Asia developed in the South and Southeast Asian countries, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia. Then East Asian Mahayana, which actually is a kind of umbrella term that covers a wide diversity of schools, especially Pure Land, Zen, as well as the different philosophical schools. So we have East Asian, Mahayana. In Asia, it's what they call East Asian Mahayana is spread over the countries of East Asia. Vietnam, well, Vietnam is Southeast Asia, but it's primarily very similar to Chinese Buddhism. China, Korea, and Japan. And now they've come to the United States. And then Tibetan Buddhism, which in Asia has been pretty much confined to the Himalayan region, Tibet, Bhutan, Nepal, and certain northern parts of India. And so in the United States, all three traditions are coming together and encountering each other. And it's even been, maybe for some, a struggle to recognize the followers of the other tradition as being fellow Buddhists. It took maybe some conditioning to transform the way of thinking to recognize a shared identity as being Buddhists. And this has been helped to break down maybe old stereotypes and rather narrow ways of thinking, so that often the traditional Theravadins will think that the Theravada alone has the true teachings of Buddhism, and the Mahayana is really a cryptic form of Hinduism or Vedanta in Buddhist clothes. And the Mahayanas would think the Theravadins are narrow-minded, selfish Hinayanas. But as the different schools are encountering and sharing platforms together, practices together, ideas together, it's bringing about transformations in the way they view each other, but not only transformations in the way they view each other, but also bringing about, to some extent, various, let's say, sharing of practices, and to some extent, even some degree of hybridization. Just to give some examples of the way these encounters have been taking place. Some of the significant encounters. When Chogyam Trungpa came to Boulder, Colorado, he established a college or university there, which he called Naropa College. Now it has university status. And in the first year, he invited Joseph Goldstein and Jack Cornfield to come together to teach the type of insight meditation that they had learned in Asia. And at that point, Joseph and Jack had not known each other, but they both came together at Naropa to teach, and they found that they shared very similar practices. And so in that way, they became friends. And then together, along with Sharon Salzberg, they established the Insight Meditation Society. I think it was in 1976 or 77 they established it. Okay, another sort of influential teacher that I should mention, who has in a way been bringing together different traditions, and this is the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who didn't establish a permanent base in the United States, but he's made quite a few tours of the US and he established his base as a refugee from Vietnam. He established his base in France, and he attracted many European people as well as many Americans to come to study with him in France at his center called Plum Village. And then a number of them have come back to the United States and established centers and even monasteries here. So Thich Nhat Hanh has at least 3 monasteries that I know of. One is in New York State, just across the river from here, called Blue Cliff Monastery. Another is in Southern California, Deer Park Monastery. And there's one in Mississippi called Magnolia Monastery. And I think that they have a retreat center, like a hermitage in New Hampshire or Vermont. But anyway, Thich Nhat Hanh So he's coming out of the Vietnamese sort of synthetic Zen Pure Land tradition, but he had gone back and studied the texts of the Theravada tradition and picked up the idea of mindfulness, which of course exists in the Zen tradition, but it's not so explicitly articulated as it is in the text of early Buddhism. So Thich Nhat Hanh has studied very extensively the text of early Buddhism and picked up the theme of mindfulness and made it pretty much the foundation stone of his entire approach to teaching. So he takes the element of mindfulness as articulated in the traditions of early Buddhism, the Theravada, but then presents it through the lens of the Zen tradition, explained and interpreted from the viewpoint probably of the Prajnaparamita and Avatangsaka Hawaiian sutras. Yeah, and then, okay, I'm speaking about the overlapping and hybridization. So we find numbers of practitioners in the Theravada insight tradition have found themselves drawn towards a type of Tibetan practice, which is called Dzogchen, because it doesn't require to practice Dzogchen, doesn't require very much of a commitment to the rituals and ceremonies and heavy cultural overlay of traditional Tibetan Buddhism. And so those who are trained within the practice of mindfulness meditation or insight meditation have found an interest in just crossing over and learn from the Dzogchen tradition. And practitioners, Tibetan practice, and Americans who have practiced in the Dzogchen tradition have also gone on retreats to learn the system, the Theravada system of mindfulness meditation, insight meditation. I might mention as an example of this, Alan Wallace, who is very learned in the Tibetan system and very, very deeply grounded now in the Dzogchen practice, but he's also done a lot of practice in the Theravada tradition, this tradition of Satipatthana. In fact, Alan Wallace had come to Sri Lanka in the early 1980s at a time when I was back in the US, but he trained and studied under my ordination teacher in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan monk, Venerable Ananda Maitreya. In fact, it's quite possible at that time that he was living in my cottage at Venerable Ananda Maitreya's monastery. Okay, now I'm going to deal with some maybe distinctive features of American Buddhism. And I want to leave some time for questions and discussions. I don't want to take everything up with my presentation. So one of the distinctive features, and we could see this already, the seeds of this already, when D.T. Suzuki was lecturing on Zen Buddhism at Columbia and attracting practitioners of psychotherapy. So this is a certain integration of meditation and psychology and psychotherapy. And so often, at least some teachers of meditation try to bridge the gap between meditation and psychotherapy by either using meditation practice as a means of helping people not only follow the path to enlightenment and liberation, but also to deal as a means of dealing with psychological problems. And what one also finds is psychologists, many, many psychologists, learning meditation in order to get a, maybe call it a clearer and deeper understanding of the human mind in order to be able to deal more effectively with their patients. And so we find a certain degree of synthesis taking place of not Buddhism as a religious system, but of the Buddhist meditative systems or practices with the practice of psychotherapy, particularly the practice of the use of mindfulness as a tool in psychotherapy. And I know there have been whole books written about the interface, the encounter of Buddhism and psychotherapy. And I'm sure that if you search on the internet, you'll find such books. I won't deal in any length with this, but we find call this a therapeutic adaptation of Buddhist meditation and mindfulness practices, and also out of the use of mindfulness, out of the encounter with Buddhist mindfulness practice, the use of mindfulness as a way of helping patients deal with problems of poor health, with physical pain, and also with psychological stress. So the general umbrella term, or even a movement under which this is taking place, is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the pioneer in this field is, of course, John Kabat-Zinn, and he has now established a whole network of practitioners who are teaching the use of mindfulness and Buddhist meditative practices, divested of the Buddhist religious envelope of those practices, using those practices to help people deal with physical illness, bodily pain, as well as psychological distress. So that's one feature of the Americanization of Buddhism. Another feature, maybe it's partly related to that, I call this bridging the gulf between the transcendent and the secular, between the world transcending and the mundane. So what I would call this something of a distinctive trend within Western Buddhism, particularly American Buddhism, whereas in traditional Buddhism, I would say the aim, the goal is the realization of a kind of world transcending attainment, whether it's called nirvana, enlightenment, liberation. But the idea is that the worldly life is inherently flawed and defective. And though we have to apply Buddhist practices to deal successfully with the challenges of everyday life, but the ultimate goal is to break free from all of the bonds and fetters and defilements of the mundane life to attain the state of transcendent liberation. I say because Buddhism in America has been adopted to a large extent by practitioners who are not coming from a religious background, but from a predominantly secular background, or maybe also from a Protestant background, let's say a mainstream Protestant background, and many from a Jewish background. So what is taking place is the interpretation of Buddhist practice is aiming not at transcendent, world transcendent realization, but rather at living a life of meaning, purpose, depth, and vitality within the world, within the here and now. And so the practice of, especially of meditation, mindfulness meditation, brings heightened and intensified states of awareness, which enable one to encounter one's everyday experience with greater precision, with greater depth, with greater openness of awareness, and with a greater appreciation for the, call this the wonders of the unfolding of the process of everyday life. And this is also sometimes conjoined with a stress on the practices, the meditative practices of loving kindness and compassion, which are seen as remedies, antidotes to the stark individualism and competitiveness of mainstream American culture. So one of the, let's say, the developing trends in American culture through the 1950s and 1960s, maybe was this particular atmosphere was well captured in the title of a popular book from that period called The Lonely Crowd. I don't remember the author. So that even in the midst of the crowd, one is still lonely. And so there was a very deep sense of loneliness and isolation, alienation. The theme of alienation was very prominent in America in the 1950s and 1960s. People are alienated from each other, alienated from nature, alienated from themselves. And so the practice of meditation, mindfulness, helps people break out from this alienation and become better integrated with the natural world and with themselves. And then the practice of loving kindness and compassion meditation helps people become more closely integrated with each other. Okay, and not maybe partly as a consequence of this de-emphasis on the transcendent, on this turn away from a transcendent goal towards the deeper, more intense experience of everyday life. What has taken place in American Buddhism and is continuing to take place is a shift in the central locus of Buddhist activity from the monastery or the temple to the lay Buddhist center. I'm sorry, many of us, or some of us here are monastics, but this is what has taken place. And perhaps this is partly because, like in the Zen tradition that came from Japan, the system of the Vinaya-based monastic ordination and training had been lost. And the Japanese teachers would marry and have families, and they would teach within the context of family life. And then some of the Tibetan lamas who came to teach here gave up their monastic vows to become lay teachers, lay Dharma teachers, and drew primarily lay disciples. And the teachers within the Theravada tradition, who became most prominent as the teachers of insight meditation, were lay people. So we have, I mentioned Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, Sharon Salzberg, and then they have trained several generations of lay teachers who go through the traditional monastic training and intensive insight meditation, but don't take the monastic vows and adopt the monastic way of life. And so, though they're lay followers in that they're not living a monastic way of life, but their approach to Buddhism is very different from the traditional lay Buddhist in an Asian Buddhist country, or in traditional Buddhist countries. In a traditional Buddhist country, the lay person does not attempt to undertake, or at least until fairly recently, would not attempt to undertake a rigorous training and meditation, but they would see their primary responsibility to be supporting the monastic community by building and donating monasteries, by offering the monastics their robes, by providing the daily food and medicines when necessary. But otherwise, their practice would be primarily religious and devotional. But with the arrival of Buddhism in the United States, people who choose to remain in lay life adopt a regular and sometimes quite rigorous meditation practice, which is more typical of monastics in Asian Buddhism. And so maybe example of this I mentioned already from the Theravada tradition would be the meditation centers in Massachusetts, IMS, in California, Spirit Rock, where almost all of the teachers and students are lay people. But there have been the monasteries that have been set up in the United States. Predominantly, I would say, the most successful have been set up by Americans or Westerners who have been trained in Thailand within the Thai forest tradition. So we have I think most of them are in California. We have Abhayagiri, which is about 2 hours north of San Francisco, established by American disciples of Ajahn Chah. Actually, the original founder was actually Canadian, but Canada is almost like an extension of the United States. So, I don't mean that literally, but he's from a Canadian background. And then in so that's in Northern California and Southern California, another monastery established in the Thai forest tradition, another monastery in New Hampshire, also in the Ajahn Chah tradition. To my knowledge, yeah, there are some centers established by Chinese monastics. The place where I'm living is Huangyan Monastery, which has been established in the Chinese tradition. And Venerable Ji Ru was formerly the abbot here, and now he is the founder of the Mapa Monastery in St. Louis. And a very important figure I should mention, I didn't mention earlier, in bringing Chinese Buddhism to the United States is Master Xuanhua, who came, I think he came already in the 1950s, or perhaps in very early 1960s, but he remained, his influence was, the early period was pretty much confined just to the Chinese community in the greater San Francisco area, till in the late 1960s, through a number of Americans who learned Chinese well in the university came to study with him and became his interpreters. And so he was able to reach a large American population, or a large group of American students, and quite a number of them took monastic ordination under him. There was a large number of monks, a large number of nuns, and he established in Northern California a place which was called the City of 10,000 Buddhas, which also created a university, a Buddhist university, Dharma Realm Buddhist University. But over the years, the American disciples of Master Xuanhua fell away from their monastic life, except for a few who remained. And amongst them is my good friend, Reverend Heng Shi, who is now the chairman of the Dharma Realm Buddhist Association. But Master Hua played a very influential role in bringing traditional Chinese monastic Buddhism to the United States. Okay, another area that I have to touch on, very important to touch on, and this is a big challenge for Buddhism here in the United States, particularly for monastic Buddhism, and that is gender issues. Because in traditional Asian Buddhism, the greater prominence, particularly monastic Buddhism, the prominence is given to the monks over the nuns, the bhikshus over bhikkhunis. And this, it's something which is rooted in traditional Asian culture, rooted in Indian culture in the time of the Buddha. So when the Buddha established the monastic order, of course, at first he was even reluctant to allow women to ordain. Eventually, he capitulated to the appeals of the women who wanted to become bhikkhunis, and he has allowed the establishment of the bhikkhuni order, but he made the bhikkhuni order subordinate to the order of bhikkhus. There are explanations for this, probably because he had to fulfill the expectations that were held by the people in the greater Indian culture. But this was typical of many other Asian cultures and Chinese culture as well. It was basically a patriarchal culture. So when Buddhism came to China, again, the bhikkhus would have a more prominent role than the bhikkhunis. And this is common throughout Asia. But now when Buddhism comes to the United States, it is a big challenge that we're facing. Even today, we're facing this challenge that it's part of considered the proper protocol. Like if the monastics are walking in a line, the monks come first. So even the young newly ordained monks precede even the elder bhikkhunis. And for the traditional Asians, accept this just as a matter of course, like this is the way things are done. But Americans coming from a strong background of gender equality, or at least aspirations towards gender equality, look at this and think, this is not right, that there should be equal status between monks and nuns, even in regard to simple procedures of protocol and etiquette. I don't have easy solutions to this problem, but we try to do things here at Huangyan Monastery to try to establish as much equality as possible within the limitations of the Buddhist monastic code. And then related to this gender issue, and this is something particular to the Theravada tradition, but also to the Tibetan tradition, is that what happened within the Theravada tradition over the centuries, I think it was in the 11th century in Sri Lanka, the order of bhikkhunis disappeared. Probably it was a time of political commotion, invasions from South India. And so the continuity of the ordination was broken. And it remained that way through the centuries, right up to the end of the 20th century. Women aspiring to lead a monastic life could become nuns with a kind of makeshift ordination status. As in Sri Lanka, they call them 10 precept nuns, but they didn't have the authorized monastic ordination coming down from the time of the Buddha himself. The situation was different in China, in Vietnam, Korea, where the system of monastic ordination was preserved over the centuries. But in Sri Lanka, women wanted to receive the full ordination, and the Western women also wanted to receive the full ordination. So what was to be done? So using a special allowance that deals with a rather technical issue, a way was found for women to take the full monastic ordination. So now within American Buddhism, we have a number of monasteries established by and for American, or more broadly, Western bhikkhunis. To my knowledge, all of them are in California. So we have Aloka Vihara, which is near Sacramento, Dhammadarani, which is in north of San Francisco, Sonoma County, Santa Cruz, there's Karuna Buddhist Vihara, and in Southern California, Mahapajapati monastery, which is actually established by a Burmese bhikkhuni, but she has American bhikkhuni disciples. But the original revival of the bhikkhuni ordination took place not through Westerners taking the ordination, but it was the Sri Lankan nuns who took the first bhikkhuni ordination. And it was through the transmission among through the Sri Lankan nuns that the American women came to take the ordination. Okay, another feature of American Buddhism that I'll bring up, another challenge that American Buddhism is facing, and that is the endeavor to establish greater racial and ethnic inclusiveness. Because in the early generations of American Buddhists, probably virtually all of them were white Caucasians who were attracted to Buddhism. But over time, maybe first African Americans and Latinos took an interest in Buddhism, and they would come to the centers established by some by the Asian Buddhist teachers, others by the American Buddhist teachers, and they would see that the entire congregation is white Buddhists. And many felt rather uncomfortable or out of place in that environment. And so as the number of, say, African Americans or Latinos interested in Buddhism increased, programs developed of conducting special Dharma programs and retreats for what are called COP or POC, POC, people of color. And the effort has been not only to provide teachings and retreats for people of color, but also to establish greater, let's say, a greater racial and ethnic spread in American Buddhism, to train African Americans and Latinos and others, to train them to become Buddhist teachers. And so now, I guess, in all of the Buddhist traditions, there are African American teachers. Let's see, in the Theravadan-based Vipassana communities, both in Massachusetts and at Spirit Rock, California, they have been conducting teacher training programs in which at least the majority of trainees are people of color, non-white trainees. And another feature, well, related to this, is the situation or the challenge faced by Asian Americans who come from a later generation, who have grown up in Asian Buddhist families, but they don't relate so easily to the predominantly devotional and religious practices of their parents' generation, and find themselves more comfortable using English. If they go to the traditional temples, say a Thai temple or a Sri Lankan temple, the language that the monks will use in their preaching and teaching will be Thai or Sinhalese or Burmese or Chinese. But they are much more fluent, both in understanding and speaking in English, and their way of thinking has been conditioned predominantly by their American background rather than by a traditional Asian background. So for many of the Asian Americans, for them, it's a struggle to, where do I find my place in this broad panorama of American Buddhism? Am I a traditional Asian Buddhist, or how do I fit in American Buddhism? But I'm really more Buddhist than these American converts, because my heritage goes back 2,000 years or 1,500 years, not 2 or 3 generations. Correct? So this is one aspect of a kind of struggle that's being faced by Asian Americans being brought up in Buddhist households, who are facing the challenges of finding their place in Buddhism within America. And then maybe a counterpart to this is the challenge in America of dealing with, call this the diversity and sexual orientation. Well, in Asian Buddhism, particularly the traditional, say, monastic Buddhism, the questions of sexual orientation are just not dealt with at all. And it's pretty much assumed that somebody who chooses to remain in lay life will marry and bring up a family. And if one feels inclined to the monastic life, then one gives up sexual relations altogether and commits oneself to living a celibate life, no matter what one's psychological sexual orientation might be. But in American Buddhism, where issues of sexual orientation are discussed and brought out quite openly, people of different sexual orientations are again struggling to find their place within the broad fold of American Buddhism. And so we have, let's say, expressions of Buddhism, formulations of Buddhism, which are intended specifically for LGBTQ, people of those communities, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, non-gender conforming, and so forth. So this would be something which is completely different from anything that one sees in traditional Asian Buddhism. Yeah, I want to leave time for questions, so I'll just briefly touch on some other issues. Another distinctive feature in American Buddhism is the emergence of what is called engaged Buddhism. So this comes from, maybe there are several sources feeding into this. One is, sometimes it's assumed that engaged Buddhism is a distinctly Western phenomena, but that is not the case at all. The seeds of engaged Buddhism already began in Asia, perhaps becoming prominent in the 19th century as part of the reaction of traditional Buddhist cultures against the Christian missionary excursion. And so Buddhists in Asia became much more active in social activities, even in political engagements, standing up against the imperial colonizers. In Sri Lanka, Dharmapala was one who sort of led the movement against the British imperial presence. In Burma, monks stood up against the British imperial rule. And in Vietnam, the Buddhists stood up against the French domination. And then in the 20th century, in Asia, various strands of engaged Buddhism started to emerge. And so when Buddhism came to the United States, that was one strand feeding into the emergence of engaged Buddhism. Another strand would have been perhaps the American Christian tradition of activism, particularly in Protestant Christianity. We had, for example, a civil rights movement in the 1960s led by the African-American Protestant churches, Martin Luther King, who is Reverend Martin Luther King, and the Southern, don't forget the leaders of the civil rights movement were it's called the Southern Christian Leadership Council. And then another strand feeding into the emergence of engaged Buddhism was the secular, non-religious peace movement in the United States. And as these strands converge, we have engaged Buddhism and its different varieties appearing in American Buddhism. And then the last point I'm going to touch on, it's the dark side of American Buddhism, and that is over the decades, scandals have arisen over the abuse of power and sexual exploitation, especially of teachers exploiting their students for sexual favors. And so this has become like one of the big issues which is discussed in American Buddhist circles, how, and the reason why these scandals break out, the way the American Buddhists look at these dilemmas, is because of the attempt to import traditional Asian structures in which the teacher or the leader has immense power, unquestioned authority and power over the students, and the students are expected to follow without question, without critical reservation, the dictates of the teacher. And so when you bring that structure over to the America, what has happened is that teachers have exploited their students using their power to exploit, especially male students exploiting female students for sexual favors, or teachers using their power to drain finances from the organization into their own personal accounts, and so forth. So this has become one of the dilemmas or challenges, is that of how do we maintain some kind of establish some kind of organizational structure that can safeguard the community against these abuses of power. And different communities have taken different approaches. One approach is, instead of having a single teacher in a position of power, to have a governing council. Another approach has been to separate the board of management from the teacher, so that the management can review and oversee the performance of the teacher. And then if the teacher is found to be guilty of any transgressions, to kick the teacher out of the position of authority. Okay, so maybe this should do as a presentation, and then we could take some questions, or maybe you have some other ideas to contribute.
Venerable Bodhi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, so I have great admiration for all your translation work. I often resort to looking up your English translations these days rather than resorting to my own Sinhalese translations, because I find them a lot more easy to digest. You touched upon several nerve points that I know at least few of us here among us have been discussing lately, how to engage Buddhism, how to make it more accessible, perhaps make it more reachable to someone who might be new to Buddhism.
Yeah.
So perhaps maybe I'll try to ask my question in this way. What originally led you to Buddhism back in 60s? Why were you particularly interested in Buddhism? Why did you, so what was your attraction to Buddhism? If someone asks me, why should I care about Buddhism? What should be my answer? Something
Okay.
like
In my case, I come from a Jewish background, but my family was not religious in any way. So we were what we call secular Jews. We would go to the temple, the synagogue, the Jewish temple, just for the high Jewish holidays, but otherwise I didn't have any kind of religious training or practice. And I felt just not content with looking ahead to a purely secular, worldly way of life. And so just some kind of curiosity arose. And then at that time, amongst a certain group of Americans, like Buddhism became like the hip thing to learn about. Like the Beats were picking up Buddhism, and I read Jack Kerouac, On the Road. And then his second major book was called The Dharma Bums, in which, yeah, he spoke about Buddhism and Zen. Yeah, so that interest was just sort of lurking in the background. And then just browsing through the bookstore at Brooklyn College, where I went to college, there were some books on Buddhism that I saw on the shelves, and then I just picked them up, and that started my journey. Yeah, so for somebody, what I find is that if somebody doesn't have any interest in Buddhism at all, not even any curiosity, no point, I never try to impose or to propagate Buddhism to others who have no interest, but just those who have, we call these, good roots or good foundations, maybe connections from previous lives, or just the right temperament on their own will develop that interest and come to the Dharma.
Right.
And particularly, I would say what is quite striking about the Buddha's teaching in its most archaic form, though there are many like religious and cultural overlays to Buddhism, but if you pick up something like, like the first discourse of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, there's suffering in life. Suffering originates from a craving or blind desire. It's possible to overcome suffering. And then we have this very clear, practical eightfold path.
Right.
It's just all so clear and convincing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, Bhikkhu Bodhi, can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly. Yeah.
Oh, great. All right, I have a question. So I feel like I often forget just how young Buddhism is in the US. I mean, the US as a country as a whole is still so young too, but Buddhism still is quite fresh. And lately, we take all these different courses and we learn about like Buddhism spread to, China, to Taiwan, these different places in East Asia. And we'll sort of jump, we'll start at the beginning and be like, and Buddhism arrived. And then it's like we sort of fast forward a couple hundred years or something sometimes and talk about the end result. So it's easier to see like, oh, wow, it did so well and it spread so quickly and all these people just latched onto it. But really, it's like there was this developmental time where it grew and there was an outreach to, the locals, and it was something that was started in the first generation, was passed on in families. And my main question, I guess, is I've known quite a few Westerners who become monks and then they eventually derobe. And I'm just wondering if there's a future in America where, as Buddhism continues to develop and grow, do you see that someday there will be more of a monastic based, even with Westerners in America? Or do you think it's going to be more of a development of a larger lay community, and it may just be something that, I don't want to say like dies off, because I often think, and I can't remember if this is the Pali Canon or if this was Mahayana teaching, but the Buddha talked about, the Dharma semblance age and then the Dharma ending age. Like, is that part of the Dharma ending age almost, that there's not going to be as much of a monastic community like in these places it spreads to? Or I was curious your thoughts.
Yeah, first, I think I'm not a prophet, so I can't really foresee exactly what's going to come. But just with my current understanding of American culture, I just don't think that Buddhism in America is going to develop the way it does, say, in Asia. Like my experience is Sri Lanka, where every village and town, well, every village will have its Buddhist temple, the town, and that will be the center of Buddhist observances for the town, for the village. Every town will have 2 or 3 Buddhist temples, and the cities will have a large number of Buddhist temples. And people will go to these temples primarily for the traditional religious, ritualistic observances, devotional practices, maybe a little meditation here and there. I don't think Buddhism will develop in the US in that way because we don't have, first, a strong background of a monastic culture, even the way, say, Italy might have. And then many of the, let's say, the rules governing monastic life are quite difficult to observe in a culture which is not predominantly Buddhist. Say in a country like Sri Lanka, Thailand, where at least the majority of people are Buddhist, so they understand the monastic way of life and they're able to provide the kind of support for the monastics that they need to live in accordance with the discipline. In the United States, we don't have a predominantly, I mean, Buddhists are just a very small sliver of the population. But I do think that there will be, that there already are, and that there will continue to be monasteries for those who are disposed to a monastic life, and they will continue to play an important role. But we will have, probably running on parallel tracks, lay Buddhist centers, like in the Theravada Vipassana tradition, IMS in Massachusetts, Spirit Rock in California, which are conducting varieties of retreats and teaching programs, primarily by lay students, but by lay teachers, but also occasionally inviting monastics to come to teach there. So I think we'll have like at least a double track or parallel track with some intersection of those tracks. And of course, the long range development of anything in America or in the world, I have to say, depends upon something beyond our own relationship to Buddhism, and that is getting the climate under control. Because if the climate crisis continues to escalate, everything is going to be finished. Okay, anybody else?
Since you opened up the question of the climate, it seems to fit into what Master was talking about earlier, the dichotomy in this country. You can cut this country in half with a knife, like going through hot butter. You've got such a polarization.
Yeah.
How do you suggest we as lay Buddhists deal with the polarization and the antagonism
Yeah.
that so many people carry around with them now?
I'm going to be stepping into rather turbulent waters with my answer to this. And I will say that the antagonism is, we speak about polarization and antagonism as though it's coming from the two sides against each other. But the way I see it, it's not entirely that way, that it's one side is utterly antagonistic to the other side. One side is living in what I recall the fact-based reality. Another side is living in an illusory reality, a fictional reality, which is created and imposed by these extreme right-wing news platforms and alternative websites and things like Facebook and Twitter, which I don't really use, as a kind of echo chamber that can, through which these conspiracy theories and these distorted information just reverberates. And people are probably, it's the people who are living under difficult, pressing economic conditions, and especially white people, maybe lower middle class or straight middle class, who are anxious about their futures, become susceptible to the kind of propaganda that is being disseminated by these alternative right-wing news platforms, websites, radio talk programs, that's creating this very, very dangerous way of thinking in the country. And I would say, of course, there will be people on the left also who tend to violence and antagonism towards those on the right. But what I would say is that the people on the left that fall into that violent wing are much, much fewer in number than those on the right. And people on the left, maybe because I'm of a left disposition myself. So, but I would say that we are pretty much living in a fairly reliable fact-based reality. And we have to face such a large segment of the US population. Don't forget, like almost half the US population voted to bring Trump back to the presidency after he's completely bungled this pandemic that's wiped out now more than 250,000 people. And playing golf while people are dying in hospitals and in their homes. And yet almost half the population has voted to bring him back to power. And now they're working by hook and the crook to find ways to subvert democracy even. And there are rallies last week, I just looked briefly in the news, don't steal, stop the steal rallies, don't steal a vote. And today there was some rallies also in Georgia, stop the steal rallies and they're working hard to undermine the democratic process. And they believe that it's real. Like I saw the other day, I think it was on the PBS NewsHour, a poll had been taken of Republicans. Do you believe that the election, the presidential election, was it predominantly free and fair election? 77% said it was a rigged election. So when you have a percentage of people who think like that, it's just that kind of antagonism and resort to violence. It's a very, very dangerous situation. What to do about it? I really don't know. But I gave a lecture on this topic and it will come up. I think that it's sort of being prepared to come up on the internet. Just a few days ago, I gave it through the Buddhist Action Coalition based in New York City called Where Do We Go From Here? So I spoke about the origins of the present crisis, what are possible solutions, but just to come to the concluding point that I made in that lecture. Yeah, I don't know the link to that, but probably if you look on the website of the Buddhist Action Coalition, it will come up within the next week or so. But the main point that I made, I think, is that what is needed is a different economic system, because we have an economic system which is creating a small class of very, very wealthy, extremely wealthy, multimillionaires and billionaires, and the great masses of the people are being pushed to poverty and near poverty levels. According to figures that I've seen, like 40% of the US population is living either in poverty or near poverty levels, which is astounding for the rich. It was said to be the richest country in world history. And the productivity, economic productivity has constantly increased over the decades, but like 90% of the wealth that's been created, maybe more, is going to the top 1%, or even the smaller 0.1%. And other people are struggling with difficulty getting health care. And even just last week, the Republicans are working to try to even wipe out the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Students are burdened with massive student debt. And now with the pandemic, people are facing even more challenging economic difficulties. Yeah, so what's needed is a transformation to a different economic system, which assures much greater financial equity amongst people. And I think that if there is a different economic system, which ensures greater economic equity, then the kind of anxiety, that vulnerability to the kind of propaganda coming out of the right wing will diminish and even disappear. So like if you take countries like the Northern European countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, you wouldn't find that way of thinking in those countries because there's much stronger social services, much greater levels of economic equality, much more concern of the government to protect and help the population. Whereas in the US, it's been completely distorted. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Excuse me?
Go ahead, Lee.
Thank you.
This kind of touched upon a question I had that you brought up while you were speaking, talking about the lonely crowd and alienation and isolation.
Yeah. Who's speaking? Oh.
And I was wondering if this is some of the problem with the division we're seeing right now. Is this maybe a lot of it rooted in isolation and alienation?
I think it's different from the way that sense of isolation and alienation was playing out in the late 1950s, early 1960s. The way I think it's playing out today, it's not so much isolation or alienation, but I would say the people in the middle, what we call middle America, have the sense that the government is working to promote the well-being of minorities, African Americans, Latino immigrants, and because of the exporting of shifting of jobs overseas, they see themselves as being economically deprived of their former position. Their former, particularly white working class people, they feel that they're losing their prestigious position within American social order, and that the more prestigious positions, well, that they're being sort of driven out, and that the government is giving too much benefits to the minorities at their expense. And this is causing a collective resentment against what they consider to be the political and economic and coastal elites, the elites in the major cities of the East Coast and the West Coast.
So you say I was too young to remember the 60s. So you're saying it's a different feeling now.
I'd say quite a different feeling. In the 1950s, 1960s, I think maybe it was the urban intellectuals or professionals who were burdened by that sense of being members of the lonely crowd, or had that sense of alienation. Whereas here, I would say the people in middle America, they don't feel so lonely or alienated from each other. In fact, there's maybe a strong sense of collective identity, but they feel that they are alienated from the mainstream drift of the country, that all of the benefits are going to the minorities and immigrants, and they are being discarded, cast aside. And that because the country is becoming more and more, let's say the percentage of white people in the country is proportionally diminishing, there's a kind of anxiety that the white people are going to lose their privileged status within the social structure of the country. Okay, any other?
I don't know if you noticed, but Venerable Cohen has joined us visually, and that's who you were looking for at the beginning of the class.
See. Yeah, I see. I saw.
I want to point out.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so maybe we should conclude for the evening.
Yes,
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule for us.
And
Okay.
before we let the Venerable Bhikkhu body leave us, let's have a group photos, okay? So everybody, please look at your camera and smile
Squeeze
to your
in.
camera, okay? Yeah.
Squeeze in.
Give me a few seconds, okay? 1, 2, 3, smile. Oh, okay. Oh, Lee, your grandkid is moving. Let me take another one.
I think we need to try it again.
Okay. we give some patience to the kids. Okay, let's wait again. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the two speakers for our class today, Master Jiru and Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. They give a very comprehensive and open, honest talk and sharing on the topics of Buddhism in United States. I think it is very fruitful for us today. So I representing this program and the class to thank two of our special guest speakers. And I hope that you really learned something from the lectures today, okay? And thank you very much. And especially Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, sorry, I think if you were able to come here, we have our way to say big thank you to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bande.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Thank
Master.
you. Thank you, Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
See you in the morning.
Be safe.
6:30.
6:30 in the morning.
And 6:30 tomorrow. Class tomorrow starts
Oh,
at
you're
6:30
cutting
in the
out. I
morning.
can't hear you.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So Jeff, you want to start up the other room? And then Tashita and I will go over there in just a minute.
It's dinner time.